Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Kristen Smith, Pennsylvania editor for the Center Square. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Anthony Hennon. This week, Anthony reported on the Pennsylvania Game Commission's $1 billion revenue boom from developing natural gas on a portion of their lands. This is in stark contrast to the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, which could open up some of its land to natural gas development, but has historically chosen not to, and as since has forfeited the profits that could have come from doing so. Anthony, talk a little bit about why the DCNR doesn't want to do this.
Yeah, so I think the quick and dirty of it is that these two state agencies have different philosophies or beliefs on how state land should be managed. Pennsylvania Game Commission approved natural gas development about a dozen years ago. I believe it was 2012. Pennsylvania Game Commission manages about 1.6 million acres. DCNR manages, I believe, 2.2 million. But basically, the Game Commission opened natural gas development on a small portion of its of the land that it manages, and that's brought in about $900 million in revenue since, due to royalty payments, just the amount of gas that's being developed, that sort of thing. Whereas DCNR has been fairly inflexible about doing this. Partially, this came from, I suppose you could say, just a statewide decision. In 2015, former Governor Tom Wolf declared a statewide moratorium on any new natural gas leases on state-owned lands. There was a bit of a loophole to that with state-owned riverbeds that they made about $50 million off in recent years. But since then, DCNR has not issued any new natural gas leases. Existing ones were essentially grandfathered in, and so they're still operating. They weren't kicked out or anything, but they have not been in a hurry to restart any sort of new leases on natural gas. When you look at the Game Commission, this is a fairly decent chunk of revenue for the agency. I believe when you look at natural gas, coal, mineral resources, I think it's somewhere around 40% of the Game Commission's revenue to fund itself is coming from that. So, it brings in a good bit of change for all sorts of infrastructure upgrades, for some conservation initiatives, for basically finding a way for the agency to fund itself. DCNR, given that their previous natural gas leases are still in operation, they've still received a good bit of money flowing in. When you look at it, I believe it's about when was that? Since 2008, I believe they brought in about $1.5 billion. So, they've had on a longer time scale, but they've brought in a good amount of natural gas money as well. But essentially, the way that DCNR views this is that of all the natural gas leases that they've issued, I believe about a third of those have only actually been opened and explored. There's still a number of leases that are out there, but companies have not come in to actually develop the land for a variety of reasons. But DCNR's standpoint is essentially, this is public land that's not necessarily meant for natural gas development. It's meant for other uses. And the leases that we have issued are not actually being exploited. So why should we issue more? This is also focused on DCNR would rather focus growth in outdoor recreation and find a way to bring in money that way. But still, you still have a lot of opposition to this total ban, giving that, 2.2 million acres of state land. They could copy the Game Commission and fund even more activities by themselves rather than turning to the state and asking taxpayers to foot the bill for them.
It's interesting that you bring up the DCNR's preference for investing more in outdoor recreation. Secretary Cindy Dunn actually told the Appropriations Committee that they believe, more so than natural gas, that the lottery ticket we're trying to cash in for Pennsylvania is the outdoor recreation economy. And that's her direct quote. She said, "It's bigger than gas, bigger than a lot of industries combined. Investing in recreation, investing in conservation is a real winner." So there seems to be a bit of a debate here about where our time and energy is better spent, because in both strategies, we are leveraging the natural resources that we have in this state to generate revenue that we can then invest back into the state's natural resources. So which one of those is a better way, a faster way of generating revenue seems to be, it depends on who you ask. Obviously, industry groups that advocate for expanding natural gas development say that working with the natural gas industry is the best way to maximize these resources. And then they support broader conservation efforts, which is what the DCNR wants to do anyway. But, for the DCNR, like you said, they just don't see the point. They don't seem to think that it's the best use of their time. And in fact, they are open to other forms of development. It's not seeming to bring in as much money, but it's not that they are completely opposed to allowing certain industries to use the resources available on DCNR lands to make money. So can you talk a little bit more about that element of this conversation?
Yeah, so the big thing here is using DCNR lands for timbering. When you look over what they do, again, 2.2 million acres of state forest land under DCNR management. Essentially, about half of that is open for timber management and taking out trees and logs. So of that 1.1 million acres, the department designates about 15,000 acres annually for timbering, and that generates the department about $22 million. That can increase or decrease depending on the year, but we're talking about $20 million from this. So there's still a decent amount of land is being available to be used for economic purposes, for natural resource exploitation. When you look at this, detractors who would like to see DCNR expand natural gas development point out that, this is timbering and taking out trees from forests has a much larger impact than, drilling miles down beneath the surface to get in and pull out natural gas. That's been the argument of Senator Gene Yaw, who has for years now been pushing DCNR to do more natural gas development. But it's kind of this battle, right, of what's more damaging to public land, natural gas or timber. Environmentalists who might not want to see as much being developed versus people who are more concerned with trying to develop local economies. This is not a Pennsylvania only debate. This is not one that's only reserved for the DCNR or the Game Commission. This is one that you see across the United States, and we don't really have a firm answer that we can really easily apply here. But, this is one of those things where DCNR deems one form of resource extraction acceptable, another one they want to downplay, and whether this is not something that's going to get resolved soon, but I think this is going to be something that we'll see, constantly, this push-pull of where does funding go, of how much do we have, what is the economic condition of these places, and what really is the potential of outdoor recreation to build things up, and really is natural resource extraction in opposition to outdoor recreation in the first place. So these are big questions that we will not answer soon, but it is something that's really animating these debates.
Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Anthony Hennon, this is Kristen Smith. Please subscribe and thanks for listening.